Akila Peoples. I'm CEO of Mental Health Research Canada, and delighted that you've joined us today for Mental Health Research Canada's webinar called The Right Not to Remain Silent, Breaking the Silence Around Mental Health in the Legal Profession. This is a lived experience opportunity to hear directly from individuals who are willing to share their stories and their journeys about mental health. And we're most grateful that today we're joined by three lawyers, Michael Herman, Beth Beattie, and Doron Gold. Michael and Beth are both practicing lawyers and are going to share their journeys with us shortly. And Doron Gold was a lawyer for 10 years and for the last 20 years has been in private practice supporting individuals in the legal profession for their wellness benefits. So I'm very grateful that you're all here today. The topic for this webinar is based on a book that was published a couple of years ago called The Right Not to Remain Silent, The Truth About Mental Health in the Legal Profession. Both Michael and Beth are contributors to the book. They each wrote a chapter, and Beth is a co-editor of this book. I've read the book a couple of times. I have it here on my desk, and I very much encourage you to dig into this book if you are interested to hear very personal stories from many lawyers and judges about their mental health journeys through the legal profession. So a great read, short stories, very personal, authentic journeys that we can learn a lot from. Next slide, please, Brittany. As a national organization, it's important that we acknowledge the land. While my colleagues are in different territories, I am leading this conversation today from the Toronto area, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and we are most grateful for the use of this land. Mental Health Research Canada is an independent national charity. If you're not familiar with us, I very much encourage you to visit our website. If you're interested in workplace mental health, if you're interested in data, we have a lot available on our website. We are best known for our national tracking of Canadians' mental health through population polling and rapid reporting. There are over 70 reports on our website, and I encourage you very much to visit those. There's a lot of great up-to-date information there. Our goal is to improve mental health in Canada through data, evidence, and stakeholder engagement. And we also support early career researchers who are working directly with communities through studentships and fellowships. So lots of information there if you're keen and eager to dig in. Just a quick comment on our agenda today. I have a couple of housekeeping items, and we're very proud to partner with Gowling WLG. We've had a partnership for a number of years, and I'm going to ask Michael Herman to say a few words on behalf of Gowling. We'll dig into our fireside chat, which is going to take up most of our time together today, and then we're going to open for questions a little bit later. So as you go through, you're welcome to put questions into the chat, and one of my colleagues will be looking at those and lining those up. In terms of housekeeping items, we always like to have a trigger warning. These webinars often cover very sensitive topics. The session will be recorded, and the full recording will be available following this webinar on our website in the coming days. As I already mentioned, if you have questions, put them into the chat function. And very importantly, we encourage and appreciate feedback. A lot of work goes into webinars, and we want to make sure that we are spending our time in ways that are useful and meaningful. And we're very pleased over 220 people have registered from across Canada for this event today. So at this time, I'm very pleased to introduce Michael Herman. Michael is a Toronto-based business law partner from Gowling WLG, former general counsel there. He has over 45 years experience advising entrepreneurs, private companies, and investment funds. Michael has a very long resume of wonderful accomplishments, but I really want to underscore that Michael spends a lot of his time sharing his lived experiences in an effort to help others and provide hope to those who may be struggling with mental health. So thank you so much, Michael, for your partnership. You've been a very good friend to Mental Health Research Canada. I'd like to invite you just to say a few words at this time.
Well, thank you, Keela. And just a quick note, I've noticed having a bit of internet connectivity issues, hopefully will not interfere, but in case it does, I'll try and get back as quickly as I can. Um, as Keela mentioned, Gowling WLG values its partnership with MHRC very, very much. It's been our privilege to provide services on a pro bono basis to support the really important work that MHRC does. On a personal note, I, I've had the really good fortune to get to know Akila, Michael Cooper, Brittany Saab, and other members of the MHRC team. And in one word to describe them is passionate. They're passionate about what they do, and their commitment and dedication is contagious. So I hope that the partnership that Gowling WLG has with MHRC will continue well into the future. Back to you, Akil.
Oh, Michael, thank you so much for those very kind words. It's always a pleasure working with you and your colleagues. And thank you for the comments about our team. If there's one thing I can say about the colleagues I work with, everybody's deeply passionate and highly committed to the work that we do. And we really appreciate a partner acknowledging that. So thank you kindly. We're going to hear from Michael in a short while about his lived experience journey. But just a couple of comments on the format today. In a moment, I'm going to introduce Beth Beattie, who's going to have the opportunity to share a little bit about her journey. And then I will probably have a couple of questions. And then we'll go back to Michael, who will share his journey. And then we'll have a bit of a fireside chat between the three of us. And a little bit later on, I'm going to bring Doron Gold into the conversation to share his expertise and his perspectives from over 2 decades of supporting professionals in the legal sector in terms of mental health and wellness. The only other thing I wanted to say at this point, that even though we're talking about the legal profession today, I think it's very important to underscore that the content of what we're talking about today can apply to many different workplaces and many different sectors. And I know from the brief conversations I've had with Beth and Michael, you as an audience are going to learn an awful lot from their experiences and their perspectives. But it's not just about the legal sector. Other high performance and high stress sectors, also have challenges associated with burnout and stress and mental health issues. Physicians, first responders, accountants, investment banking, these are all very high pressure, high stress environments. And at the end of the day, workplaces everywhere need to continue focusing on improving mental wellness. And I think that's one gift the pandemic gave us, is that leaders are now thinking a lot more about workplace wellness. It's no longer something that just exists in HR. It's truly something that leaders need to focus on, regardless of what sector they're working in. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Beth Beattie. Beth is a lawyer at the Ontario Ministry of the Attorney General, health law litigator with experience in human rights, forensics, civil mental health, and coroner's inquests, and again, a very long resume with many accomplishments. And I do want to point out Beth's an award-winning lawyer, named one of Canada's top 25 most influential lawyers just in 2025. Congratulations, Beth, on that and many other accomplishments. And I do want to thank you and Michael for having the courage to talk in a very personal way about your experiences. I believe that's the only way that we are going to reduce stigma, is to have real conversations with real people who can share their stories and give others hope. So Beth, you wrote chapter 3 in The Right Not to Remain Silent, and your chapter was titled To Tell or Not to Tell? That is the question, revealing mental health issues at work. And I know from reading the chapter a few times, you're very forthcoming about your experiences, and that you, I know, have been symptom-free for over 20 years, but you live with bipolar disorder. And you talk about the journey in terms of deciding about disclosing this at work. And one thing that struck me when I read your chapter was that you talked about coming out as gay many, many years ago as a very, very difficult experience for many people. But you quickly went on to say that coming out at work with a bipolar disorder, mental health disorder, was far, far more challenging. I found that to be a tremendously powerful statement. I could go on, but I'd rather pause and turn the mic over to you to share with us your journey.
Well, thanks so much, Akila. I appreciate that kind introduction. And one of the great things about becoming a mental health advocate is teaming up with Michael and Doron on talking to audiences about the importance of addressing mental health issues. It's just been such a privilege, and I certainly appreciate you having me on today. Yes, so I have bipolar disorder. It was diagnosed when I was 35 years old. I do also have an anxiety disorder. The bipolar disorder is sort of at bay thanks to really good medication. The anxiety disorder is kind of a constant. I'm always, dealing with that. So I don't want people thinking that I'm totally in the clear because I do struggle with anxiety. But my mental illness dates back to when I was a first year associate at one of the big Bay Street firms. I had a very deep depression, and I finally got help for it and responded very well to medication. And I did great for 2 years. And then at a difficult time in my personal life and at work, the combination led me to stop sleeping. And for me, if I combine lack of sleep with an antidepressant, it can zoom me into mania. So my first couple of manias were mild. I was, hyperactive. I was euphoric, energetic, even though I wasn't getting any sleep, very irritable. And I love mania. For me, it's great fun, but for the people around me, it's not a pleasant experience at all because I'm so wired. So on and off for 8 years, my psychiatrist put me on different meds, and I would have long stretches of normal mood in between the ups and downs. But then when I was 35, I again reached a difficult point in my personal life as well as my work life. And I became manic. And it was not a mild. It started out as mild, but within a few days, I became floridly psychotic, meaning that I had lost touch with reality. And a long, long story short, my family was finally able to persuade me to go to CAMH, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, which is the main psychiatric facility in Toronto. And I had a 2-week stay there. It started by being put in 4-point restraints and shot full of antipsychotic medication. It was really quite an adventure. And so I was there on a Form 1 under the Mental Health Act and then a Form 3. And I think the most interesting part of that story is that I went to work during the second week. I got up in the morning, had my breakfast, took my medication, went into the office, did my thing, and then returned to the hospital at night so they could make sure I was taking my meds and responding well. So all of this to say, we just don't know what our colleagues may be experiencing in terms of mental illness and in terms of addiction as well. So I was mortified at the thought that people would find out about my illness, particularly in my role as a litigator. We want to be seen as unflappable and no chinks in our armor. So I certainly didn't want anyone to know about it. And I was also very anxious about the idea that I would get sick again. Lots of people with bipolarity do get sick again, and I'm no one special. And I thought it was just going to be a matter of time before I would become manic or depressed or both. So that kept me quiet for 14 years. It's great that I'm out speaking about my illness. And I've been doing it for 8 years, but for 14 years, I was a condensed ball of angst, not sharing my story. And that was extremely, extremely difficult for me. And as you said, Akila, my chapter talks about the comparison about coming out as being gay and coming out as being mentally ill. And if I put it in very simple terms, I think it's kind of fun being gay because I'm a bit of a rebel, and in my job we're quite conservative as lawyers, and it's sort of my opportunity. And there are always lots of great parties, and gay pride is such good fun. We have this massive parade where 1 million people show up to celebrate. There's no celebration about being bipolar or being mentally ill or having addiction issues. So I think there were just no role models for me during those 14 years when I was that ball of angst. Yeah, so it's great. It's very cathartic now, having disclosed and being able to help others.
And that was a really interesting narrative that you talked about in the book, and you just referred to now, where you felt when you came out as gay, you entered a whole community. And your face lights up when you talk about that. And then disclosing a mental health condition, you felt there was no support for that. So the dramatic difference in those. And I know, of course, you've gone on to create, support groups and whatnot. Interesting to hear a little bit more about how you chose to tell colleagues. I recall from your book, the chapter you indicated that you chose to do a presentation to the 45 member staff, and you had 2 months to prepare for that. And that's how you chose. And of course, there are many different ways when someone chooses that they want to share this with family and colleagues and friends, but this is what you chose. So I'm interested to hear about that.
Yeah,
Very courageous.
I did. I told one person at about the 10 out of 14 year mark, my best friend in the office, and she was very supportive. So I had that, support in the office. But it wasn't until I was turning 50 and I thought, what does the next stage of my life look like? And I told a few people in the office, sort of my best friends, and they were all extremely supportive. And then I talked, and it was very cathartic. I'm like, well, this is kind of fun. Like, why don't I tell someone else? And because I got so much support, I finally talked to my legal director, who was also extremely supportive. And she and I talked about me making a presentation at one of our branch meetings. And as you said, it was a couple of months because I wanted time to figure out how I was going to tell my story. And it was awful. I think the weeks leading up to it, I had an upset stomach. I couldn't sleep very well. I had these like sharp pains of anxiety shooting through my chest. And I remember the morning of, I was quite desperate. So I ended up taking half a clonazepam just to like calm me down. And then I just told my story for 20 minutes. I just, from start to finish. And at the end, my colleagues gave me a standing ovation. Still brings tears to my eyes thinking about it. And there's just been no going back. I just thought with the support of all of those colleagues, I can become a very vocal advocate. And all along, they've been very supportive.
And you described, and I'm quoting you from your chapter, what started as the most difficult thing in your life turned out to be the best thing that you've ever done.
Yeah, it really was. I think part of it was because I was so hidden for those 14 years, a real darkness. Again, the comparison to the being gay, that's kind of light and white, whereas the depression was dark. And so I had wonderful, wonderful opportunities. I ended up, the Globe and Mail published an article that I wrote. And then a couple of years later, I became a friend of the Bell Let's Talk campaign. And that was a wonderful experience. I was on like billboards across the country, and on the Marilyn Dennis show, like all of these wonderful things. And it was just because I had been so closeted for 14 years, to then be outspoken was just such a wonderfully cathartic experience. Now, most people don't get those opportunities, but even just starting in the early days of disclosing to my colleagues and getting the support, that was a really wonderful experience. So I encourage people to reach out, even if it's just one person, and get the support. And I think, if you know colleagues well enough, you're going to know that one colleague who's, sort of therapist and a very supportive person.
Yes. Two more questions, and then I'm going to bring Michael into the conversation. You said that an unexpected outcome of disclosing your mental health illness has been the relief on the faces of people to whom I speak.
Yeah, it's been tremendous. I've had so many people come up to me after presentations or emailing me. And I would say 9 out of 10 people who I speak to one-on-one disclose kind of one of a mental health issue that they have or that a loved one does. And it really, when I'm able to see faces, can't do it today, but generally speaking, I can really see people like they're tense at first, and then I feel I see their shoulders relaxing during the course of my presentation. So I think people want and need to talk about mental health issues. And the best way to start that is to hear from others who have lived experience.
And we never know who's struggling. It could be your neighbor, it could be a family member, it can be a child. So many people are struggling in silence. And that's, about what today's all about, is talking about this and why it's helpful to talk about it. So my last question is, how are you doing now?
I'm doing brilliantly without being manic. A group of us organized the Law Society's mental health summits for legal professionals, and that's been a big success. We get 6,000 or 7,000 people watching every year, live or on demand. And our next one, our 6th annual one, is coming up on Tuesday, May the 5th. And it's free, and it's worth 4 professionalism hours, so highly recommended. And then the book, The Right Not to Remain Silent, has been a huge success. And we just recently, there was a US edition of it published because it's doing so well. And it's interesting, writing the book, there were 18 contributing authors. And it went from idea to publication in 18 months, which apparently in academic circles is extremely rare. But it was just because people like Michael and the others were so motivated to get their stories out there and to help people. So that's all been wonderfully exhilarating. And being able to do presentations like we're doing here today is really invigorating.
Terrific. Thank you so much for sharing your story. We really appreciate it. And we'll talk a little bit more in a moment. Let's turn to Michael. Michael, you wrote chapter 9 in the book, and you titled it Depression, My Journey Through Darkness. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about your journey.
Sure. Thank you, Akila. And thank you for having us today. To talk about the book, but also to talk about our individual stories. And while we're lawyers, our stories are universal, and the stories in the book are universal. Imagine for a moment that you wake up every morning and you feel as if you're being sucked into a deep, dark hole. And no light enters into that hole, and there's just no escape from that hole. And it's as if you're falling into an abyss every single morning, every single day. Certain days, you feel nothing. No energy, no interest, no emotion, no nothing. It's just numbness. Other days, I would feel a sadness that was so profound that it hurt more than almost any physical pain I'd ever experienced. And then there were those days where I felt like I was buried alive. And you can imagine the anxiety and the panic that I would experience on those days. By all accounts, I had had a successful career for 30 plus years. I now realize that over the course of that career, I was dealing with mild to moderate depression much of the time, anxiety a fair amount of the time, particularly through major life transitions. And I had not recognized or identified what I was experiencing. What I had learned, both internally and externally, is if you're having a tough time, just push through it. And that's what I did until I couldn't do it anymore. And what started happening to me is I started having physical symptoms. I would have colds, viruses that just wouldn't go away. I started having severe digestive problems. There were other sort of physical ailments, nothing really serious, but enough that the cumulative effect of them was that over time, I lost all of my energy. I had lost the ability to concentrate and to focus on anything. And I started falling into that deep, dark hole. And so I decided to take a few months leave of absence, thinking I'll deal with the physical ailments, get a little bit of rest, come back, good as new. And of course, that few months went by and nothing changed. And so I had to extend my leave of absence, and now it was going to be an indefinite leave, and I had no idea whether I would ever return to work. But I continued to focus on dealing with the physical ailments. And nothing was changing. I'm standing on a balcony. I recount this in the book. I'm standing on our balcony of the condo that we live in, looks the ravine, drinking a cup. And the thought was, what's the point? What's the point? And that thought staggered me. And it was at that point, whoops, I am frozen.
I wonder if you might turn off your camera for a few minutes. Notice that I know you mentioned you were having a few internet challenges today. We might have lost Michael.
I'm not sure
Oh, did we get you back?
if people can hear me.
I can hear you now. Got you back. Are you there, Michael? Did you want to turn off your camera, Michael, just for a moment to see if that helps with bandwidth? Okay, I think I will pause for a moment and see if Michael's signal comes back. Beth, I'll ask a quick question of you. I saw it pop into the chat, and that was someone asked, did this experience ever lead to you reconsidering your career choice?
No, I've loved being a lawyer. I love law school. I love being a lawyer, although a friend of mine is quick to point out that when I was in the fourth year as an associate, okay, I'll just finish this answer and then go on to Michael. I went to Nepal for a trip, and when I came back, I was dedicated a lot of time to quitting law and opening up a yacht clothing import business. So certainly there were times on Bay Street where I was struggling. But no, I wouldn't say it's impacted on my career choice. And in fact, I probably like the fact that I'm doing the mental health work in the legal field, because I think, if the lawyers can pull it off, like get support and write books and that sort of thing, then I think all sorts of other professions can as well.
Thank you. Well, where did I get to?
I think you were just talking about your moment on the balcony.
So the moment on the balcony, so I'm drinking a cup of coffee, and then I had this thought. And the thought was, what's the point? What's the point? And it came out of nowhere and it staggered me. And it was at that point, for some reason, that I recognized that if I was going to get better, that I had to deal with my mental health issues, not as much my physical health issues. And that started me on a very long path that lasted a fairly, and will continue for the rest of my life, but about a year before I was able to return to work, of recovery, and it had many different elements to it. And there were a lot of lessons that I learned for myself that I have found helpful. And in the midst of that recovery, actually, when I was in the depths of despair and had no idea that I was where I was going to end up, I made a decision and a commitment to myself that if I ever did recover sufficiently to be able to return to work and resume normal activities, that I would share my story. And the reason I would share my story was so that if I could impact just one person, not to struggle in silence, but to reach out to somebody who they trust, to somebody who feels safe. No one needs to struggle alone. We all deserve the help that we need. And so that was my touchstone. It was the reason I decided to share my story. And it remains the reason I share my story today. I wanted to touch on one thing. So I saw a couple of things in the chat about stigma. So if you don't mind, Akila, I'd like to
Absolutely.
just touch on one thing around stigma. I believe that I did not stigmatize those who had mental health challenges. What I didn't realize was that when it came to me, I bought into stigma completely. Self-stigma is an insidious effect of stigma. And one of the reasons that we need to not just reduce it, and we are making progress at reducing it, but eradicate it, is because of self-stigma and what it does to those who are dealing with mental health challenges. I had unconscious and very toxic beliefs that I was to blame, that I was weak, that I was unworthy, that I'd be rejected, that I didn't deserve help. And that led to shame. And I think it's Brené Brown who said that shame corrupts the very part of us that believes we are capable of change. So I was going to get better. If I was going to start to recover, I had to go in and start to address and work with the shame and the self-stigma. That was a foundation for everything else that I could do that would help me improve. And with a lot of help from some very good people, that
Couple of internet problems again.
I
Beth, why
was
don't you
able to
join?
start doing that. And so in terms of stigma, I just wanted to really hone in on self.
Breaking up a little bit there, Michael. We'll come back to.
I'm frozen again.
Yes, I think so. Beth, why don't you join us again? And we'll have Michael, we can circle back. I'm not sure if Michael can hear us. So one of my questions to both of you, can you hear us okay, Michael? Okay, we'll pause for a sec. One of the questions I was going to ask both of you, and maybe Beth, you can answer first, is are we doing better in the last couple of decades? Have you noticed a change in evolution? And then secondly, what can workplaces, employers, and leaders do to move us in the right direction?
Yeah, I'm happy to address that. And I know Doron makes very good, insightful responses to those sorts of questions. I think we are doing much better than we used to be. Again, like when I was diagnosed back in the early 2000s, um, no one was talking, no lawyer was talking, certainly not
I'm
bipolar.
back. I apologize to everybody. I'm so sorry.
Okay, there's a bit of a snowstorm here in Toronto, so I think that's what's interfering. Sorry, Beth, keep going and we'll bring Michael back in.
Yeah, thanks. So I think we're doing much better than the time where no one was talking about mental health, anxiety, depression, any of that. Now we are talking very openly, like there are all sorts of people talking and writing chapters of books, articles, doing these sorts of presentations where organizations such as yours puts on these education programs, which is terrific. And I think it's neat that we're talking about more than mental illness. We're talking about other things that cause angst. So there's much more discussion now than there ever was about perfectionism and imposter syndrome, two issues that not just in the legal profession, but across the board. And I just think it's so wonderful that we're talking about those things. That doesn't mean you have a mental illness, but it means as a perfectionist, it can really, really be troubling and sort of hard to get away from. So when you hear stories of other people who are perfectionists and how they've addressed their issues, that's very helpful. At the Ministry of the Attorney General, there's a really good program put on about making mistakes, right? Like you can really, I allowed a couple of mistakes I made at the beginning of my career, defining my career for a number of years. And had I heard stories of people sharing the mistakes that they had made and how they psychologically dealt with them, my career would have gone much smoother. So we're talking a lot more than we were. I think, unfortunately, there's still some lip service to some aspects of mental health. So, for instance, I hear a lot of stories about people wanting to go on leave, like a health leave. It's not a mental health leave, it's a health leave. And sometimes it's okay to go on one of those leaves, but coming back can be extremely problematic. The employers just make it very difficult, make people jump through a lot of hoops, require that there be doctors' notes explaining how they can come back and then how they're going to be accommodated. So it's fine to talk about mental health issues, but if you're not actually going to support people who go on leave and then want to come back, then it's just lip service. And I think leaders, I think they have to recognize that there are mental health issues out there, addiction issues, and that we can be fully functioning contributors to the office if we get the help that we need.
So a well thought out return to work plan is seemingly critical. I'm going to invite Doron to come into the conversation. If we could just pull up the PowerPoint just for one moment. I wanted to interject a couple of stats from our data. And Beth, you can stay on with us as well.
By the way, Keela, I'm on. I'm just keeping my camera off to hopefully.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Michael. We'll bring you in a second. Brittany, if you could just go to the next slide. I have a couple of data slides that I just wanted to share. Across all sectors, our data shows that burnout rates of employed Canadians is on the rise. From 2023, it was 35%. Now we're showing rates of 39%. In some ways, not surprising because of all of the economic pressures Canadians are facing, geopolitical tensions, and we bring our whole selves to work. So if we're stressed about issues in our lives, it's going to show up at the workplace as well. Next slide, please. Brittany, just a shout out that there is a return on investment business case to be made for this, that burnout prevention does save money for employers. And there's some really interesting information here. I encourage you to go to our website. There's a report on this that if you're interested to see that, burnout companies that invest in burnout prevention can certainly see a much lower rate of burnout. Next slide, please, Brittany. We also have an economic toll of mental health report that we did. We conducted this in August 2025. This was a nationwide study. There weren't enough folks from the legal profession that responded, so we couldn't report on the legal sector, but you can see across different sectors, there's different results here. And if you follow that QR code, it'll take you to this report. I just wanted to shout out on this slide. It's not only absenteeism that's an issue, but it's also presenteeism. People that are coming to work, not their best self, not able to perform optimally. And you can see that 2 in 10 participants fall into that category, where 1 in 10 lost days. And last slide. Brittany, there is a study that was done by University of Sherbrooke, Federation of Law Societies of Canada, Canadian Bar Association in 22 to 24, and they were looking at rates of distress and burnout in the legal profession. This was a self-selected study, so people volunteered to participate in this, which can be a bit problematic in results, but nevertheless, you can see there's a wide gap there where general workforce 40% and legal professionals at 56%. So that's a study that folks may want to look at if you're interested in following this topic a little more fulsomely. Doron, welcome to the conversation. You are a lawyer, practiced law for 10 years, but for the last 20 years, you've been working supporting those in the legal profession to coach their personal wellness and support them through mental health challenges. I suspect that what you've heard today from Beth and Michael might not be that uncommon, even if the rest of us might be surprised to hear, high-performing individuals. The intersection of high-performance culture and wellness is maybe not what we'd like it to be. But any thoughts that you have at this juncture from, your practice and supporting people in the legal profession?
Thank you so much, Keela, and thanks to Beth and Michael also for, as always, being so candid and raw in their characterizations of their experiences. It's not uncommon because I've done this with Beth and Michael before, first of all. And it always feels like the impossible act to follow, because the most powerful messages come from the people who are actually living it. The anecdotes, the true stories coming from the individuals really animate what people go through, as opposed to a, mental health professional like me talking about what I see. But I'll talk about it anyway. Been doing it for about 20 years now, coming on 20 years of, not practicing law and working in lawyer assistance programs and in private practice as a therapist. And I was always animated by something that Michael said, which is the idea that people shouldn't be suffering in silence. I remember early in my career doing this work, imagining, as I was working at a lawyer assistance program, fielding calls from lawyers and law students and judges about their struggles. I imagined that there was this litany of individuals struggling alone in these rowboats at 3 a.m. in the middle of a lake with no oars. And all they needed was for someone to notice them and help them get to shore and let them know they're not alone. I just imagined thousands of them out there, because as I was getting these calls from people, it was very clear this was very much endemic to the profession of law and other professions too, as well, as I've learned over the years. But in professions like law, we start from a very harsh place, which is this preconception that mental health is a matter of character, not a matter of humanity. That if you're struggling, if you're depressed, then it's not about compassion and assistance. It's about weakness, because there's this macho notion in many professions that we need to be strong. We need to convey strength. We can't show vulnerability. What if people see our vulnerability? We'll never get a job. We'll never get a client. And so we hold it in. And particularly with people who have, the personalities of professionals, these personalities that are about excellence and hard work and liking intellectual challenges, but also about the shame that Michael talked about, the idea that if there's something in me that is not okay, that doesn't feel okay, it's my fault. I am the cause, nobody else's fault. And by the way, no one can know, because then I'll be excommunicated, I'll be stigmatized. That's partly the self-stigma. In fact, it was interesting when Michael mentioned about, stigmatizing oneself perhaps more, but thinking about how people will react. I was on the steering committee for the study you mentioned through the University of Sherbrooke, and one of the questions we had was about lawyers who believe that certain mental health conditions are stigmatizing or should be stigmatizing, that there's something wrong with the person, and what lawyers believe other people in the profession think about lawyers who struggle with those things, and their perception of what others think of it was much higher than what they thought of it. They thought others would judge them much more harshly than even they judge
Michael's nodding.
themselves. And that was statistically backed up. And therefore, what you find is those individuals naturally gravitate towards isolation. They hold it in. They don't want anyone to see it because if they see it, they'll be in big trouble and that'll be the end of their careers. They've worked so hard to become lawyers and now it's all going to go away because I'm so weak. And um, and so I need to hold it in and make sure no one else knows and somehow find a way to pull myself up by my bootstraps, whether I have boots or not. Um, and all of that internal world, it actually ends up making someone go deeper and deeper and deeper because they feel worse and worse about themselves. And in the context of a society or a profession where everyone seems so pulled together and so perfect and so
Mhm.
amazing, how shameful it is that I am the lone one over here who can't handle it. Add in considerations I noticed in the chat, mention was made of racism. Add in considerations like the othering of an individual in a workplace or in a profession for that matter, in any number of ways, including by virtue of race. And how much you have to carry that now. Should I say something if someone says something untoward to me, or if I experience a microaggression? Or maybe that'll make me a troublemaker. Maybe I should be quiet if I'm being sexually harassed. Maybe I shouldn't say anything. That is all in the mix, and the individual is generally going to default to blaming themselves and figuring out how to do self-care, which in their case just means withdrawal. And one last thing I'll couple it with is what was mentioned before. I think Beth mentioned perfectionism and imposter syndrome. If you grow up in a house where you brought home a 95% on your math test and your father said, but where's the other 5%? You are going to have a default reaction to that, which is, I'm only, I only matter if I'm 100%. I'm only going to be good enough for people if I'm 100%. And if I'm in a profession, everyone else seems to be 100%. And therefore, I've got to aspire to it. Now, perfection doesn't exist in the human condition, except perhaps in
Mhm.
mathematics. And yet the person is never enough and always chasing it and always trying to hide if they're imperfect. That self-judgment is so toxic to the individual. Um, and as you said, you mentioned some of the statistics about, I won't go into the statistics now because of time, but our study showed statistics about the disproportionate level of depression, anxiety, substance use amongst lawyers compared to the members of the general population by multiples because of all the stress and all of the hard work and all of the demands and all of the fear of being judged and fear of your reputation being damaged. It makes people hide as opposed to not suffering in silence, as Michael said. And so the power of a talk like this, the power of a Beth, the power of a Michael talking about this is people at the top of the profession saying, yeah, but I am a human and I have gone through stuff. Everyone goes through stuff. That's not a sign of, character flaw. That's a sign of being a human. And we all deserve compassion. If three people in a profession of 60,000 lawyers in Ontario are doing that, the 59,000 and some are going to stay quiet. But if a couple thousand lawyers start speaking up and saying, we back this up, we think this is important, we think we should be speaking openly, now we're creating a movement. Now we're making it maybe even uh, something that you want to do, that you want to join that movement of compassion and kindness, that I want to be trauma informed, that that's who I want to be in this profession. That's how I want this profession to be. And so that's what drives me. I think it's what drives Beth and Michael in terms of speaking out, is to turn the ship in a better direction because everyone who's struggling deserves to know they're not the only one. They deserve to know that they deserve compassion and help and that there's no weakness associated with it. They're just human beings experiencing life, and everyone needs help sometimes.
So one quick question, Doron, and then I'm going to go to questions from the audience. So Brittany, I know, has received questions in the chat and by email. Doron, from your vantage point, are we doing better in this sector? Are things getting better? I'm sure we have a long way to go, but are you
Things,
seeing some successes in terms
yeah,
of
oh yeah.
culture
Well,
changes?
well, listen, there's lots of successes, even just generationally. If you look at the statistics about,
Mm,
Gen Z, they're at least, as I've seen in the statistics, picking jobs in part, not based on possibility of partnership or money, but on the basis of whether they're going to get to be human beings while they do the job. That's a new phenomenon that didn't
mhm,
exist with Gen Xers like me or boomers. That's a new phenomenon that a lot of Gen Xers and boomers in places of power are having to contend with and not necessarily liking all the time. These young people don't want to work. It's not true. They want to make sure that their work doesn't destroy them. So yeah, there is
mhm,
progress. Um, as with anything, the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice. It also bends back sometimes. There's a
mhm,
lot of social forces right now that exist to push back against a lot of the progress that's been made in society. And I include mental health in this. This
mhm,
idea that we're going back to a kind of macho notion of being gritty and tough and let's not coddle people. We need to keep pushing and get back against that so that the progress keeps moving forward. I
mhm,
think we're fine. I think directionally in the bigger picture, yeah, it's moving in a better direction, but there are definitely forces aligned to push back on us. And it's our job to not let them win.
mhm. Great comments. Thank you. Brittany, do you have any questions for any one of our panelists and guests today?
Hi, yes, I absolutely do. I want to start off by thanking everyone for sharing openly and thank everyone here for being part of such a thoughtful conversation. Creating space for these discussions really matters, and I think this conversation today has proven that. And so now, as Akila said, we are going to jump into a question period. We've had some questions emailed over the past weeks, so I'd like to start with a couple of those. It seems like we've lost Michael for now, unless I'm wrong. So I'll give him a moment to connect and then I'll jump back to the question that was designed specifically for him. But I'd like to start with,
I'm back.
hi, Michael. I'd like to start with Beth because we did get a question in the chat that comes from something that you were speaking about, and it is how can legal workplaces support colleagues returning from a mental health leave without unintentionally creating additional stress? And I know you spoke to that a little bit, but if there's anything more specific that you can point to.
Yeah, hold on a second. Let me get the one. Okay, hold on. You here? Are you? Yeah.
I think, Michael, you might have logged in twice.
Yeah. So now I'm gonna try to get out one.
Maybe you need to close one window.
I'm trying. Hold on.
It is kind of psychedelic. It's really,
It won't. Okay. No. Well.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
So I think your question was for Beth, right, Brittany?
Yes. Yep. So specifically wondering what legal workplaces or other high pressure workplaces or just workplaces in general can do to support colleagues returning from a mental health leave without unintentionally creating additional stress for that person. And you're on mute.
Thank you. I think a good place to start is by putting on education sessions like the one that we're doing today. And if it's a small group of people in a particular organization, to organize everyone attend another session. It could be virtually, just to normalize the conversation about mental health. So that takes the pressure off that individual person as if they have to solve the problems of the world. When they're coming back from a health leave. So education is so important. And we're reluctant traditionally to talk about mental health issues, right? Like we haven't wanted to pry into people's personal circumstances. So that's kept us quiet. But if you see a colleague come into the office with their arm in a sling, you're probably going to ask them what happened and how they're doing. And similarly, it's fair enough if we think that a colleague isn't doing very well to ask them how they're doing. And if there's anything that we can do to support that colleague. It sort of depends on your chemistry with them, like how well you know them, and it's a judgment call as to whether to raise it or not. One thing I say to people working with someone who's going through a difficult time, including returning to the office, is if you don't know what to say to them, you don't have a relationship that would naturally result in you asking how they're doing, then you do something very simple, which is to compliment them. Because those of us who are lived with anxiety or depression, we can have a very difficult time propping up our confidence. So if someone says to us, hey, you did a really good job on that letter or on that factum or that presentation went really well, then that can go a long way to supporting our well-being. And it's objective evidence of how we're doing at the office. So I'm not an employer. I've never been in management, so I don't really know what advice to give to managers other than to take steps to normalize the discussion around mental illness and addiction in the workplace.
Sorry, am I back?
We hear you, Michael. Yep.
I'm so sorry. I have something to say on this because I think it's a really important question. And I think, I'm not a mental health expert. I'm certainly not an expert on mental health in the workplace, but we want organizations that have high performance cultures that set challenging goals and have high expectations. But as the statistics that you shared, Akila, show, and these have been replicated again and again and again, to have that high performance, people need to be doing well mentally and physically. And so you need to combine high performance culture with a culture of wellness. They're not mutually exclusive, they're inextricably linked. We do a pretty good job with a lot of the programs that we have, work-life benefit programs, education, supports for those who are struggling. But in isolation, they're not enough. It starts with leaders. The leaders set the emotional tone for the organization. And if leaders are setting a tone that supports perfectionism, arrogance, invulnerability, that becomes the culture. If leaders support and model openness, respect, humility, and vulnerability, then that becomes the culture. And we need to train leaders in how to do that with their people. Think about the last time that you really felt heard and seen and respected at work. And chances are it was an interaction with leaders. We need external rewards. Don't get me wrong, they're important. But ultimately, if we do not see people as people, then performance doesn't follow. When we see people as people, when they are heard, when they are respected, then performance follows, not the other way around. And so we can demand output and we get compliance. We, on the other hand, can make people feel understood, respected, and safe, and we get engagement. And engagement leads to intrinsic motivation, and then we can create those cultures of high performance and wellness. So if where I land on this, and Doron may have some thoughts, and I know we're almost out of time, is we need to train leaders in how to interact with the people that they lead. And that's not just the C-suite. That's anybody who's responsible for supervising people. I'll stop there.
Brittany, I'm going to jump in if that's okay. Doron, where can people find you if anybody's interested in connecting with you in terms of your professional practice?
Of course. You can find me at thelawyertherapist.ca or dorongold.com. I have a therapy practice as well as doing presentations on these topics in various organizations. I also feel like I would just want to say, to dovetail off of what Michael said very quickly, the key is listening. If you're asking what can organizations do, ask the person, what do you need? And then
Mm,
listen. Be curious and be humble that maybe you won't know how to handle it. Don't tiptoe around them. Ask them what they need. And if they say I'm good, then trust them and go on about your day. But listen to what they need because they're the experts in their lives.
nothing for us without us. No, that's great advice. Thank you, Doron. It has been terrific to hear from all of you. I'd like to ask you each to answer one final question, and that is, if you want people in the audience to leave with just one thing or one nugget of information, what would it be? Beth.
I'm going to say two things. One is we don't know what some of our colleagues are experiencing. And the second thing I would say is that as scary as it feels to disclose one's mental health issue, I think much of the time, if we pick the right people to disclose to, we can have a great deal of support come our way.
It's terrific. Thank you. Michael, what's one thing you would like people to leave with today?
So I'll repeat the one thing that has been my mantra all the way along my journey of just talking about my experience. If people are struggling, please, 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 you do not need to struggle in silence. You are worthy of getting the help you need. We have someone like Doron here who can help. Reach out, talk to somebody. You deserve to get the help that you need.
Thank you. Doron?
I might as well give a therapist type answer. Um, for everyone, monitor the conversation in your head. Is it a supportive, loving, compassionate conversation? Is it giving you grace? Is the conversation allowing you to be imperfect? Or is the conversation in your head judgmental, harsh, even insulting, or cruel? Because if it is, that is feeding the illness. That is digging you a deeper and deeper hole. It's not doing you well. You're not going to beat yourself into shape. You're going to beat yourself into submission. So if you catch the conversation in your head being one that is harsh and uncompassionate, know that that's counterproductive and that being kind to yourself actually is the way to be better and feel better.
Terrific. Thelawyertherapist.ca, Doron Gold. Folks, thank you so much for being here today. We're enormously grateful, especially to Beth and Michael, for being so courageous in sharing their personal journeys. It's the only way I think that we are going to start to normalize conversations about mental health in the way that we talk very casually and openly about our physical health. And Beth, your comment on that was well taken. Hopefully workplaces everywhere are moving towards better workplace wellness. And it's never a place you arrive, it's a continual journey. That's the thing I think for employers that makes it daunting. It needs continual focus always to get better because environments change, people change, staff change, circumstances change, but we all need to work on this collectively. Last couple of comments. We just released a report this week it's called a National Pulse Check on Mental Health. It makes a very direct connection between healthy Canadians, healthy employees, increased productivity, and building the economy, something that everybody's laser focused on these days. So I invite you to go to our website and look at that. Thank you again to our panelists. And our next webinar on lived experience, we're talking to a young woman who's been battling drug addiction and is on her journey to recovery. And that webinar is in a couple of weeks. So these lived experience webinars are very well attended, and hopefully they are helping to open up important spaces for conversations. Thank you to everybody for joining us. Thank you to our panelists. I knew an hour would fly by. I'm sorry we had lots more to talk about and never enough time, but so grateful that you joined us. Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.